World War II ended. But a new conflict emerged. The United States and the Soviet Union became rivals. It was a clash of ideologies. Capitalism versus communism. Democracy versus authoritarianism. The world watched with bated breath. Both superpowers had nuclear weapons. The threat of total annihilation loomed. Fear and suspicion ran deep. It was a time of espionage and propaganda. The stakes were incredibly high. This was the Cold War. A war fought without large-scale battles between the main adversaries. But it was a war nonetheless. It touched every corner of the globe, and it cast a long shadow over the latter half of the 20th century. The world held its breath. The United States and the Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons. The destructive power was unimaginable. The threat of a nuclear holocaust was very real. People lived in fear. Governments built bomb shelters. Children practiced duck and cover drills in schools. The possibility of nuclear war was a constant source of anxiety. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink. In 1962, the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The United States responded with a naval blockade. For 13 tense days, the world waited and watched. Finally, a diplomatic solution was reached. The missiles were removed. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the close call served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the nuclear age. The Cold War rivalry extended beyond Earth, reaching into the vast expanse of space. The United States and the Soviet Union fiercely competed in what became known as the space race. It was a battle for technological superiority, a quest to demonstrate which nation held the future in its hands. Each side sought to prove the merits of its political and economic system through space exploration. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, marking a significant milestone. It was the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth, a groundbreaking achievement. The launch shocked the United States, creating a sense of urgency and competition. It spurred a wave of investment in science and education, particularly in STEM fields. The Soviet Union achieved another first in 1961, furthering their lead. Yuri Gagarin became the first human to journey into space, orbiting the Earth. The United States was determined to catch up and surpass the Soviet achievements. It set its sights on the moon, aiming for an unprecedented goal. In 1969, the United States achieved a stunning victory with the Apollo 11 mission. Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon, uttering the famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." It was a triumph for American technology and ingenuity, showcasing the nation's capabilities. The space race had a profound impact on the world, influencing many aspects of life. It led to countless technological advancements that we benefit from today. It inspired generations of scientists and engineers to push the boundaries of what is possible. And it showed the power of human ambition and cooperation in the face of adversity, paving the way for future space endeavors. The Cold War was a global conflict that spanned several decades, fundamentally shaping the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. While the United States and the Soviet Union never directly fought each other, they supported opposing sides in many proxy wars, fueling conflicts around the globe. These conflicts often had devastating consequences, leaving behind a trail of destruction and human suffering. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 was one such conflict that saw intense fighting and significant loss of life. The Korean Peninsula became a battleground between communist North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, and South Korea, backed by the United States and its allies, leading to a brutal and protracted war. Millions of people died in the brutal war, with countless others left wounded or displaced. The Vietnam War, from 1954 to 1975, was another tragic chapter in the Cold War, marked by fierce combat and widespread devastation. The United States intervened to support South Vietnam against the Communist North, backed by the Soviet Union and China, leading to a long and costly conflict. The war dragged on for years with no clear victory in sight, causing immense suffering on both sides. It claimed the lives of millions of Vietnamese and over 58,000 American soldiers, leaving deep scars on both nations. These proxy wars demonstrated the global reach of the Cold War, affecting countries far beyond the borders of the superpowers. They highlighted the willingness of both superpowers to use military force to advance their interests, often at the expense of smaller nations. And they left a legacy of pain and suffering in many parts of the world, a stark reminder of the human cost of geopolitical rivalry. Section 5. Whispers behind the Iron Curtain. The Soviet Union maintained tight control over Eastern Europe. It imposed communist regimes and suppressed dissent. The region was often referred to as the Eastern Bloc or the Soviet Bloc. It was separated from the West by what Winston Churchill famously called the Iron Curtain. The Berlin Wall, erected in 1961, became a powerful symbol of this division. It physically and ideologically separated East and West Berlin. It also represented the broader separation between the Communist East and the Democratic West. Despite the risks, there were acts of resistance against communist rule in Eastern Europe. People yearned for freedom and democracy. They staged protests, published underground newspapers, and risked their lives to challenge the status quo. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 was a major uprising against Soviet control. It was brutally crushed by Soviet tanks, but it inspired others to fight for their freedom. The desire for change was growing stronger behind the Iron Curtain. Section 6. The Thaw. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was facing serious challenges. Its economy was stagnant, its people were weary of oppression. And a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power with a vision for reform. Gorbachev introduced policies of perestroika, or restructuring, and glasnost, or openness. He sought to revitalize the Soviet economy and increase political transparency. These reforms had unintended consequences. Gorbachev's reforms emboldened those seeking change in Eastern Europe. Pro-democracy movements gained momentum. The Soviet Union, weakened by its own internal problems, was less willing to use force to suppress these movements. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was a pivotal moment. It marked the symbolic end of the Iron Curtain and the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. The Cold War was coming to a close. Section 7. A World Transformed. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked the end of the Cold War. The world had changed dramatically. The bipolar system, dominated by two superpowers, was gone. A new era of uncertainty and opportunity was dawning. The end of the Cold War brought about a wave of democratization. Many former Soviet republics and satellite states transitioned to democratic governments. It was a time of hope and optimism for many. However, the transition was not without its challenges. Economic instability, ethnic conflicts, and political turmoil plagued many former communist countries. The legacy of the Cold War continued to shape the world in complex ways. The end of the Cold War also led to a reassessment of global security. The threat of nuclear war receded, but new threats emerged. Terrorism, regional conflicts, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction posed new challenges to international peace and security. Section 8. Echoes of the Cold War. The Cold War is over, but its legacy endures. The world still grapples with the consequences of this ideological struggle, and in some ways the echoes of the Cold War can still be heard today. Geopolitical tensions persist between Russia, the successor state to the Soviet Union, and the West. The conflict in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, and cyber attacks are reminders that the rivalry between these powers has not entirely disappeared. The Cold War also left a legacy of mistrust and suspicion. The world remains divided on many issues. Ideological differences, economic competition, and strategic rivalries continue to shape international relations. The vast sums of money spent on the Cold War arms race could have been used to address other pressing global challenges. Poverty, hunger, disease, and climate change continue to plague humanity. The need for international cooperation and diplomacy has never been greater. Section 9. Lessons from the Brink. The Cold War was a period of great peril and uncertainty, marked by the looming threat of nuclear annihilation and intense geopolitical rivalry. But it also holds valuable lessons for humanity, lessons that are as relevant today as they were decades ago. By understanding the mistakes of the past, we can strive to build a more peaceful and just world for all. This means learning from the errors and successes of those who came before us. The importance of dialogue and diplomacy cannot be overstated. These tools are essential for preventing conflicts and fostering mutual understanding. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed that even in the most tense situations, communication and negotiation can avert disaster. It was a pivotal moment that underscored the power of diplomacy. Open channels of communication are essential for resolving conflicts and building trust. Without them, misunderstandings can escalate into full-blown crises. The Cold War also highlighted the dangers of unchecked militarism and the arms race. The relentless pursuit of military superiority can lead to a dangerous and destabilizing spiral. The pursuit of military superiority can lead to a dangerous and destabilizing spiral, one that threatens global stability and peace. Investing in diplomacy, conflict resolution, and human security is far more beneficial than pouring resources into weapons of war. These investments create a foundation for lasting peace. Ultimately, the Cold War teaches us that we are all part of one human family. Our differences should not divide us, but rather enrich our collective experience. We share a common destiny on this planet. Our actions today will shape the world for future generations. Cooperation, not conflict, is the only sustainable path forward. By working together, we can address global challenges more effectively. By embracing our shared humanity and working together, we can overcome the challenges of the 21st century and create a brighter future for all. This is the ultimate lesson from the Brink.